So what I want to talk about today is the basics of editing in Blender. And specifically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making a castle. So let's just say I wanted to have a castle in my video game. How would I go about doing that? There's a couple basic principles that I find that are really important when you're doing any modeling in any way, shape, or form. And keeping it as simple as possible is like the #1 principle. It's very easy to add too many vertices, to get an object that's really complicated and therefore very hard to manipulate, very hard to to edit. So we want to keep things really simple. So I always like to start with simple shapes and then go from there. And I try very carefully to only make the shape as complicated as necessary. So we're going to go over a couple of basics as far as editing is concerned today. Working with vertices, working with edges, working with faces, extrusion, loop cutting, okay, and then lastly, Booleans, because those can also be very, very helpful. So that's kind of a layout of what we're going to do today. Let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is, obviously this is a cube. If I'm making the tower for a castle, we'll start with the tower because I think it's the best thing we can start with right now. I'm going to just delete that object and I'm going to go Shift A, or I'm going to go down to the Add menu, doesn't matter, Mesh, and we're going to add ourselves a cylinder. Now the first thing that it's important to kind of keep in mind as far as Unity is concerned and bringing objects into Unity is the grid really matters. Unity is looking at that grid as the center of the object. And you can have multiple Blender objects, but when it brings it into Unity, it's kind of looking at it as one big thing. So where the grid is and where the object is in relationship to the grid is actually really important. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this thing up. Now down here you have the different manipulators that you can use. So this is the Translate manipulator, allows me to drag it to, up, down, sideways, whatever, depending upon the axes. The next one is the Rotate manipulator. And the Rotate manipulator works pretty much the similar way as Unity does. You can rotate an object in different axes, but the thing that always seems to freak people out is this white circle that goes around it. And that white circle, what that is that white circle is rotating something perpendicular to the camera axes. So if you were to draw a line from the camera to the object, I can rotate an object around that axis. That's kind of a cool thing that it does that I really like a lot. Anyway, so we can also rotate things, around specific axes. And then lastly, we have our Scale manipulator, which allows you to scale things in certain directions or certain axes. Or if you just grab the center, you can scale things up uniformly across all axes. You're going to find that I use very few of these. I always go to the keystrokes for the most part. So if I wanted to scale this up, I just hit X or S. If I want to scale it only in the Z-axis, I hit SZ. And now I can scale it up in the Z-axis. So this is probably a pretty decent size for a tower. Once we get a little further into it, we'll bring it into Unity and we'll test our sizing before we get too far into it. But for now, let's just do this. The other basic thing that's really important about Unity and modeling is controlling your view. Right now, I've got my 3D view and I'm in perspective mode. I'm just kind of looking at it from a certain angle. But on your keyboard, you can hit the numpad. These numbers that are on the numpad, they actually do quite a bit. So if I want to look at this from the top, I hit the 7 key. And you'll notice that if I slide it side to side, you can see it in perspective. If I hit the 5 key, what it does is it flattens it out and gets rid of perspective. This is really handy for lining things up. So I almost always hit the 5 key and I leave it that way. And the reason why I do that is because when I go to my top view, or if I hit the 3 key, I'll go to a side view here. Okay? It's really nice to see it without perspective, because without perspective, you get the grid, you get to line things up. It becomes very handy. So let's get back to Translate mode. And now I'm going to drag this up, and I want to set it down so that the bottom of this thing is basically on the grid. Okay, that's really important so that I have got that grid is in there. I can hit Z, which turns this into a wireframe, okay, which you can also do right here. And I can see the original grid right there and kind of get a sense of space. This is pretty big. A person, this would fit, this is, I don't know, about the size of a small room or a decent sized room. So if I want to make it a little bit bigger, I totally can. So Z, and then I will hit the S key and I'll scale it up a little bit more, maybe scale it up in the Z axis, hit the 3 on the numpad, and then I'll go and put this right down on the bottom. Let's just assume for now that that's big enough. So what's going to be my major problem when I put this in the Unity? Can anybody guess? So let's say I were to have my character inside. What's the problem with this right now? Well, it's not open, so there's no doorway in. But let's say there was a doorway in. Are the walls, do the walls actually have substance right now? No, this is what we call paper-thin object. In other words, it doesn't have two surfaces to the walls. Right now it only has one surface to the wall. So our goal here is to create two surfaces so that our character in Unity can actually walk into it. So in order to do that, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to now get into edit mode. And we're going to start altering this object to create a better look. So first I'm going to hit the tab key, or you can go down here to the selector and change to edit mode. And there we go. Now, there are 3 different types of things that make up a 3D object. The first is a vertice. You can see I've selected one there, and that is an individual point. And those individual points can be dragged around. They can't be scaled, but they can be dragged around. I don't think I can hit scale and do anything. Yeah, so you can't scale it. The second type of part of a 3D object is an edge. And what's cool is the edit mode has these selectors where you can select by vertice, edge, or face. So if I go to the edge selector and I right-click, now I can right-click on the line that is between 2 points. So that is an edge. This makes a lot of sense, okay? And I can drag that edge out, and you can see how that modifies my object. Lastly, we also have something called a face. And the face, if I go to face select mode and I right-click, the face is basically the skin of the object that appears between points and edges in an enclosed shape. So what we have here is a rectangle, and inside this rectangle we have a face, which is that skin that's basically stretched between those 4 points and those 4 edges. And I can drag that, and again it modifies my object in a slightly different manner. So kind of knowing which one to manipulate and what to do with each one of those things, that's one of the biggest and most important parts of editing an object, is knowing when to grab an edge, when to grab a vertice, or when to grab a face, okay? You can also delete faces, vertices, and edges too, and they will do different things. So for instance, if I select this vertice here, right up top, whoops, I didn't select it. So if I select just one vertice and I hit X and I delete that vertice, you can see it actually causes a big, huge mess, because this top can't fill anymore because I deleted and now have made that edge that went all the way around the top open. And so you lose a whole bunch of stuff here, you lose a whole bunch of stuff on the top. If I, however, go into edge select mode and right click and hit X and delete, I can still delete vertices, by the way. Now it makes an even bigger mess because it deleted both vertices that were at the edge or the ends of that edge. If I delete, if I hit the X key and delete edges, now it deletes the line between the two, but it keeps the vertices there so that the face at the top and the bottom can still exist. If I hit X and I delete faces, it doesn't really do anything because I don't have a face selected. I only have an edge selected. only edges and faces, well, in that case, I have an edge selected, so it will delete the edge. And then obviously, only faces will do nothing again because I don't have a face selected. Now, if I go to face select mode and I select a whole face, now if I delete only faces, you can see it keeps all the edges, it keeps all the vertices, but it opens up a hole. It just deletes the skin, basically, that's stretched between those edges. So this is actually really, really powerful, okay, for opening up doorways and so on and so forth. We're going to use this in just a second. And you can go through and experiment with all the others. If I were to go X delete edges here, it's going to create a big, huge mess because now it's deleted all 4 of those edges, and now it's opened everything up. But we also have these 2 edges here at the bottom and 2 more at the top that are just kind of hanging out, doing nothing. So that created actually a pretty big mess. So you do want to be very careful about what you're doing. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a tower. So I'm going to right-click at the top. I'm going to X to delete and only face. And what that does is that kind of keeps our top. Now, I'm going to go around and I'm going to select the edges here. Okay? Now, I can do that by right-clicking and holding the Shift key down, and I can go all the way around. Or I can hold the Alt key and right-click, and if the edges are all connected in the appropriate manner, it will actually select the entire rim. This is very handy. So now I've got the entire rim selected, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a process by which we call extrusion. And extrusion is a machining term that's kind of been translated into 3D animation and any kind of 3D building, 3D modeling. And it essentially means to extrude is to take a shape and pull it into 3 dimensions. So for instance, let's get out of this for a second. Go over here. I'm just going to add a flat plane. Now if I go into edit mode, okay, and I take that and I hit the E key to extrude, it pulls that 2-dimensional shape up, and now I have myself a cube. Does that make sense to everybody? Let's delete that. Okay, so what I can do is go back into here. Whoops, nope, don't want to delete it. Wrong key. Okay, so tab back into edit mode, go in here, and hit the extrude key. Now if I do that, and then I move my mouse, you can see it's extruded a new edge, a new rim. So a whole series of edges and vertices that's basically, it's copied them. It's basically duplicated them. And now I can bring them up in 3 dimensions. Now, this doesn't look so good. So what I'm going to do is instead of moving the mouse, very carefully I'm going to hit E and then left click. The left click kind of sets the position of my new rim, but it's right on top of the old one, so you can't see it yet. Now there's a danger in this. If I click off of this now or go select something else, I've got double vertices everywhere here, and that can cause you troubles. We'll talk about how to get rid of those later. But what I'm going to do right now is that I'm going to go and I'm going to hit the S key, and I'm going to scale it in a little bit and get myself what would be the thickness of my wall. I want this tower to be pretty big, so I'm actually going to make the wall relatively thin. Doesn't really matter. It's all about senses of scale and relativity. Hit the 7 key on the numpad, and I can kind of see how thick the walls are in relationship to the rest of the tower. So that looks pretty good. Now I want to do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to bring a new set down to continue the wall down the middle of the cylinder. This makes sense, right? So I hit the E key, and I left click immediately again. If you accidentally do this, the best thing to do is just undo, undo. You have to hit undo twice. You're undoing the move, and you're undoing the extrusion. That's another really important part, because what people will do is they'll only hit undo once. They undid the move, but there's still a brand new set of vertices and edges there, and if you forget about it, now again you've got duplicates, and that is a pain. So I hit E for extrude, left click. Now I grab the blue arrow and start moving it down. Now the real question is, how can I tell when I've gone far enough? Well, that's where the wireframe mode comes in again. I'm going to hit the 3 key on the numpad, which is going to get me to my side view, and I'm going to hit the Z key or go here and go into wireframe. Wow, I did that actually pretty darn good. But now I'm going to take and make the floor roughly as thick as the walls. Okay, and I can kind of see where they are right here, looking at the yellow edges and I can kind of make a nice start for a floor. Now if I scroll back and take a look, we haven't finished the floor yet, so we don't have a full thickness floor, we just have this outer rim, so we need to start extruding again. So I'm going to hit E to extrude, left click, S to scale, and bring it in. Now, we're going to talk about how this looks different from the original in just a second. I like to do 2 stages, so I'll do 1, and then I'll hit E to extrude again, and then scale. Now, what I want to have happen is I want all of these points to come together in the middle. If I just keep scaling them down, that's fine, but there's still multiple points. Excuse me for a second. Now my throat's really getting sore. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to merge all these points together. So under the Mesh menu, you can go to Vertices, and there's a Merge section, or you can just hit Alt-M. So I'm going to go here, Alt-M, and it's going to ask me where I want to merge, at the center, at the cursor, or collapse. I don't even know what collapse does. I've never tried that. At cursor means where this cursor point is. So it would merge them and bring them all over to here. Not good in this case. We just want them to go into the center. So boom, at center. Now all those points become 1. And now we've got ourselves a nice floor. But it looks very different from the one that Blender puts in for you by default. Now this is actually a major, major issue, believe it or not, especially when texturing for video games. Blender will allow you to fill a face with no point in the center. This becomes really difficult when we are UV unwrapping for our objects. You guys don't even know what UV unwrapping is yet, but I'm just going to tell you it becomes a major issue. So if you are ever using cylinders and you're using a pre-built cylinder from Blender, you have to click. We're going to go to face mode. We're going to take this. I'm going to X delete only faces. Open that up. We can see right down in the middle of the walls. Okay. And I'm going to go back to my edge select. Alt right click. Okay. And then I'm going to E extrude, left click, S scale, bring it in. E extrude one more time, left click, S scale, Alt M at center. And now I've got the same thing on the top and the bottom. This is for when we do our textures. It's very important that I have this because I need to be able to tell it where to cut my object apart, and it has to go all the way to the center. If you have a vertice or a face, I mean, that's filled like it was, where you don't have lines going into the middle, edges going into the middle, that's bad. That will not work. We'll have to convert it. So, I mean, and it's not a fatal error. It's just frustrating, okay? So now we've got a tower. So now there's a couple of things that we could do. First off, let's say that this is multiple floors, and we're going to have stairs going up to the floors and stuff like that. I would make those out of a separate object. I'm not going to try and make them out of this object, because that gets to be really complicated, because you can't see what you're doing, and yada yada, all that sort of stuff. So we're not going to worry about floors yet, but what I do want to do is I want to make the turrets that go along the top of my tower here. Depending upon the scale, I might like them to be a little bit tighter, okay, because they are a little bit, they're pretty well spaced right now. So I could select all with the A key, and I could try a subdivide. Oh, I don't like that. Yeah, we'll just leave them as is. I would have to do a loop cut and slide in between each one. We'll talk about loop cuts and slides in a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you another feature of Extrude when you use the face selection tool. So I'm going to choose the face selection tool. I'm going to go to the top, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to right click and then hold the shift key down and right click every other space. Okay, now I've got them all selected. Now one of my students in the previous period said, oh, you're going to drop them down. No, I'm not, because if I did that, it actually brings everything down. And the reason for that is because by doing this, I still have selected every vertice, even though I haven't selected every face. But what I can do is I can extrude. So if I hit the E key again, you'll see I'll get a whole nother set of faces, and it just brings them up like that. So it's really kind of cool, very smart. So there we go. Now we got a good set of turrets going along the top here. And now might be the time to set at least this top floor. And then I can duplicate that top floor, and then we'll talk about how to get a door in this sucker. So I'm going to tab out of edit mode. It looks pretty good. We're also going to talk later on about how to make this look a little higher res. Okay, right now it's very faceted. It's low resolution. We're going to talk about how to make it look a lot better with a modifier later on. I mean, I could go in and I could subdivide if I wanted to, and it would start to look better. But the truth of the matter is, then you have more points. And remember what I said before, keeping things simple is huge. So we're going to try and keep it simple. So let's get out of here. Now, to make a floor, all I'm going to do, 7, I'm going to left click here, and that's going to put the cursor right in the center there. And I'm going to Shift A, and I'm going to add myself another cylinder. And what I'll do is I'll bring it up here to the top so we can see a little bit better. And I'm going to go 7, Z to move to wireframe, and I'm just going to hit scale. And it's pretty close to the center of the object. I did that really well because I placed the cursor. So that's a little thing that a lot of people don't know is when you add a new object, it always adds it where the cursor is put. Okay? So now I've made it slightly bigger than the size of my inner wall. And now I can very carefully just kind of line it up so that it's going to look good like that. Now if I get out of that, you'll see in solid mode, it's too tall, obviously. But I got it lined up, hit scale, 3 on the numpad, and then S and Z, and now I can scale it to a Z. And I'm going to make it roughly the same thickness as my walls are. So that looks pretty good. Let's go back here like this, and now I've got a floor. And I can duplicate this and copy and paste it all the way down. What I would probably do first is create a hole in it, do some stairs. We'll go there later. But let's actually duplicate it once so that we know how big our door is going to be. So I'm going to hit Shift D. That duplicates it. It's right on top of the old one. I left click, and then I just drag it right down like this. And let's say that's going to be about the size of a single floor in this tower. Okay, why not, right? Let's bring it up a little bit. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'm going to right-click on this one, and we're going to turn it off. So the visibility is off here in the hierarchy or in the scene list here, and we can see our first floor there. So now we're going to make ourselves a door, and we're going to do it in a very similar way. So I'm going to start with a cube. So I'm going to left-click. Let's see, here we go, 3. I'm going to left-click right here, and it's going to move the cursor. And one of the cool things that Blender does is it moves that cursor. It puts it right on the surface of the mesh, which is kind of cool. And I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to bring in a cube. There we go. Go to Wireframe Mode with the Z key, Scale Z. Let's make it about the height we want our door. Bring it down so it's level with the floor. And then SY to scale it in the Y. And let's take a look. I want it to go through the wall, so scale X makes it a little bit deeper. Okay, look at it in solid. That's a pretty big door, but I think we'll be fine. So now, besides, it's castle. It's meant to be intimidating, right? Okay. So now I'm going to go into edit mode. And you can see my cube, but I don't like just a square door. I want something a little fancier. So we're going to make an arched door, arch the top. So I can actually turn my cylinders off, and I'm going to leave the floor on so I can kind of see it, and I'm going to do loop cuts and slides. Now loop cuts are really powerful, and they're a good way of adding vertices and edges without subdividing. Subdivide adds things everywhere. Loop cuts and slides do so, but with much more control. So the keystroke for that is Control R. So Control R, I'm going to go here, hover, and click. It always goes in the center between whatever vertices you are in. Left click and left click. And the reason why left click, Control R, once I left click, now I can slide it. That's why it's called a loop cut and slide. But in this case, I just want it right in the middle. So I left click and left click immediately. I'm going to go over here, left click immediately. Here, left click immediately. people are probably going, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Well, I want to make my arch. So then I'm going to right-click in Edge Select mode, and I'm going to bring my arch up about to there. This is going to be a big door. Then I'll, with the Shift key, select both of these, bring that up like there, and I want it a little bit steeper in the corners, so I'm going to go Control R, get one here, and get one here. And now I can take these two, go to my 3 view, and ever so slightly, that's a pretty good arch. That'll be excellent. All right, so let's get out of our edit mode. Let's turn our cylinder, turn our cylinder back on. And now go to wireframe, make sure it goes all the way through the cylinder. I can move it a little bit if it doesn't. There we go. So this is looking good. So now what I'm going to do, Z, there, I hit tab instead of Z, is we're going to do what we call a Boolean operation. And a Boolean operation is a simple mathematical equation, basically, where I subtract one object from another. I can add them together, or I can do what we call an intersection. So we're going to do both, actually. So the first thing I'm going to do, we want a door, we want a hole in the door, but maybe we want a door that's actually going to be there. So we're going to do this 2 times. So I'm going to take my cylinder, and I'm going to Shift D, duplicate it. No, Shift D, there we go. I hit Control D. And now I've got 2 of them. Okay. So I've got cylinder. So let's start naming things, because I got a lot of cylinders here. Let's start calling this is tower. This is duplicate tower, so we'll call it tower dupe. This is going to end up being our door. This one here, this is our first floor, and this is our roof. So I'll call this roof. So naming things, once you get all these things, is so much better. So we'll call it second floor, because that's really what it is. Okay. Now, we're going to right-click on our first tower, go to our modifiers, which is this little wrench. We're going to hit Add Modifier, and we're going to add a Boolean modifier to it. Now we're going to do a subtraction, or difference, of the door, which is the cube. I should have named it. Okay? Now, nothing happened, right? Not true. Turn off the cube, and you can see it drilled a hole through it. Okay? It keeps the cube there, so you can use the cube multiple times, which is really nice. So that's what we're going to do. So right there, by a Boolean, I actually drilled a hole through it. Now, I can hit the Apply button, and if I tab into Edit Mode, you can see that there is now a hole straight in my object. It's very cool. Okay? So that's pretty nice. So now what we're going to do is we have our other tower dupe here. So let's turn this tower off. We have a second one. We have our cube back. I'm going to click on that second tower, add another Boolean modifier, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to do the intersection of the two. If I did a union, then they would be added together, and you would have a funny cylinder with a door sticking out of it. But what we want is we want the intersection of that in the cube, and you can see how it disappears. And if I turn off the cube, you can see that we now have a nice door that's sitting right there. I hit Apply, and now I'll go back to the items properties here, and I'll just call this door. Okay? And now the cube here, we can do a couple of things with it. We could delete it. We could do any sorts of things with it. You know, we're running to the end of class, and you're not going to get any chance to work. So guess what? I'm going to do something fancy with it. Let's turn our tower back on. We've got our door right there. We've got our cube right here. I'm going to turn that back on and select that. So what I want to do here, let's look at it from perspective and wireframe. I'm going to scale it up. I'm just going to hit S, and I'm going to scale it like this. And then I'm going to scale actually in the y-axis, which is the green axis, until my distance is about the same all the way around. We're going to make ourselves a nice little door frame. Okay? So now I've got that, and you can see how that works. I'm going to tab in, okay? And I'm going to add another loop cut here. So Control R, go to the middle, bring a loop cut like this. In fact, I should probably stay in wireframe mode so I can really see what I'm doing. So that, yep, that looked pretty good. And I can bring it down. I'm going to go to Control R again and click and bring one down here that's right there. And then Control R here and bring it over. And just lining it up with the door frame. Control R, like that. So now I have this, and what I can do is click here, 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 and here. Delete edges and faces. And now I've got the start of what will be a nice door frame. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to, let's turn off our tower here. So this looks pretty good, but it goes in a little far, and honestly I have to reconnect it and delete all that other stuff. So here's another thing that's a lot faster. If I hit 3, whoops, went off center here, and then I'm going to swing around by using the 6 key. Now I can see it from the side. Wireframe mode, make sure nothing is selecting by hitting the A key to select all and then deselect all. I'm going to go to Vertice mode, hit the C key and circle select. It gives you a little paintbrush that you can paint selections. Right click to get out of it. And now I'm just going to delete all those vertices. Hit select all. Look at this again like this. E to extrude, left click. Bring my new door frame in. Check the tower, how it's going to look with the tower. I think that looks pretty cool there. Select, circle select, take this, bring it in. That doesn't look too bad. That doesn't look too bad at all. And I could bring some edges down and make sure that the arc actually matches the arc of the door. When I scaled it up, it changed the arc a little bit. But you can see how that looks, and it starts to look really good. Those little touches like that are things that will make your environment look a lot better when you get into your video game. So if you have holes in there for windows or something like that, put a little sill on it, you know. Look at pictures of castles that are in Europe or Germany and stuff like that, and look at how they construct some of these things. I mean, it's really a really powerful and very cool thing that you can do. Let's say this is just the beginning of a castle, and I'm going to bring the main wall of the castle out of the center of this turret and stuff. You can do all the same things. We will do that as a demo in class too. Booleans to create a hole, extend new walls out. I would build them as separate objects, but you can really just kind of go and do things very easily if you know how to use extrusions, loop cuts and slides, how to manipulate vertices, edges, and faces, and to do Booleans. And when you figure out those simple things, you can see how fast you can make something that's actually pretty darn complicated, okay, and make it look really good. Then we throw a texture on here and a bump or a normals map to make it look like rock and do all sorts of other stuff, and this thing will look gorgeous. And it's a very simple cylinder that I modified into something a lot more complicated. I know this is kind of a long demo, but does that make sense to everybody, what I did and how that works? All right, and the last thing is make sure you save it and save it into your game folder so that it's in the right place.